off this real quick.
Cool. Okay. So the last thing that you're going to want to do, did anyone else have any more questions about filtering and sorting before I move on? No? Okay. So the next thing you're going to want to do when you first get your data set in is just make sure that you don't have any duplicates. A lot of times when companies are creating data sets or when anyone is creating data sets, certain rows of the data are duplicated and you want to make sure that you get rid of those. So in this data set, we don't actually have any duplicates. It's like already cleaned. But let's just imagine that we do have a duplicate. So let's make one. So if we do, oops, sorry, my email just popped up. Okay. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm trying to get my email to go away. Okay, there we go. So if you click on this 2 on the side and then just control click and copy it, or control C, and then go down here, control click, and then just do insert copied cells. It's just going to duplicate that column, or that row, I mean. So notice that we have 2 of the first row. So now in this data set where we have a duplicate, we can get rid of the duplicates by just going to your data tab. And then there's a little thing over here. It's really small. It might be larger for you guys if you have it full screen, but it says remove duplicate. So if you click on that, actually, let me unselect that column real fast. So click remove duplicates, and then it'll have this option of doing whichever column you want. So if you want to do all of the columns selected, that's going to only remove duplicates where every single column has the same value in it. So say we only want to just look at invoice ID and say, if there's any 2 rows with the same invoice ID, delete the row. So if you just unselect all and then hit column A, that's going to be looking to see if we have any duplicates in the invoice ID column. So hit OK, and it says 1 duplicate found, and it was removed. So now if you look, we don't have that duplicate up here anymore. It just deleted one of them. So it's a pretty easy way to get rid of duplicates and just make sure your data is all clean. Does anyone have questions about removing duplicates? No? Okay, so I will hand it off to Adrian. He's going to go over some formulas for you guys. Let me stop screen sharing.
What's up, guys? So yeah, I'm just gonna go over some of like the basic formulas in Excel. Let me share my screen real quick. Can you guys see this right here? Perfect. All right, so I know I'm sure if you took Biz 214 financial accounting, you probably went over the really simple and brief things in Excel. The first thing I wanted to show you was the if statement. A lot of people use this in Excel, but if you didn't, or use this in financial accounting, sorry. But if you didn't, if statement's pretty easy. You put equals if. Every time you start a formula, you have to start with the equal sign. If, and basically if, you can see right here, it's a logical test, value of true, value of false. So basically if it meets the standards of the logical test, if it's true, what do you want it to produce? If it's false, what do you want it to produce? So let's say if this right here, Q2, is greater than 5. If it's greater than 5, let's write high because it's greater than 5. Sorry. Every time you write, if you want it to produce a word, you have to put it in quotations. So high, and then if it's false, we want it to write low since it'll be under 5. Always close parentheses at the end. So basically, if it meets the standards of being over 5, we put high, and if it doesn't, put low. So because this right here, this number 9.1 is over 5, it's going to write high. But if you see right here, since this is not over 5, it's going to write low because this is 4.1, which is less than 5. I also put all the formulas here just in case you guys needed to see them. You can see when I drag and drop this, the numbers right here behind the Q's change. They change accordingly. So on 2, it'll change to 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. If you don't want that to happen, there's something called the absolute reference. An absolute reference is basically you put a money sign, money symbol in front of whatever you want to lock in. So you can lock in Q, which is the column, or 2, which is the row. So let's say I want to lock in the row, right? You can use this horizontally and vertically, but the rows are horizontally. So if I want to lock in the row, I go like this, drag and drop, and you can see they're all high, they're all the same because I locked the number 2. Vice versa, if instead of locking the number 2, I lock the Q, which is the column, it'll be normal again because Q doesn't change when I drag and drop because it's vertical. It only changes horizontally. Horizontally on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the row numbers right here. So basically, now that we have this, if we want to make it easier to see on the numbers, instead of having to look if it's high or low, there's something called conditional formatting. What that is basically like the if statement, but it highlights the boxes. So if you click on the column right there, Q, if I want to look at this column, you go to home, and there's this button right here called conditional formatting. You go to highlight cell rules and greater than. So the number we put earlier was 5 if it's greater than 5. So same thing right here. We're just going to type the number 5. And then if it's greater than 5, let's put it as red. So if I click OK, all the numbers higher than 5 right here will turn red. And vice versa. If you want to do anything that equals 5 or is less than or equal to 5, same thing, click Q, highlight cell rules, you click less than, and you can change it right here. We can change it to less than or equal to, put 5 right here, and then we wanted a different color. You can choose anything, red border, red text, but for this purpose, we're going to do the green fill with the green text. Okay, so essentially everything that's not red is going to be green. So we can see that all the greens are lows and all the reds are highs. If you want to delete the conditional formatting in this square because we don't really need it, because that's part of the title or the categories, we can go clear rules and clear rules from selected cells. So the next thing I wanted to go over was also group cells. You don't use group cells a lot necessarily, but you could use it if you wanted to simplify data. So let's say like we had these three columns right here, but they were kind of unnecessary and we didn't really want to use them. We could highlight all 3 columns. All you do when you highlight is just drag it across 3 columns. You go to data, and then you click group right here. Essentially what it does is if you're presenting this data and you don't need these 3 columns, you can minimize it and it'll just close it. It'll still be there if you open it, but when you're presenting, you could just present it like this if that was extra data you didn't need. Like I said, you don't really use it a lot, but it does come in handy sometimes. If you want to close this, you do that and then ungroup right here, and it'll reverse the group so that be gone. And then I'll also explain what Vlookup is. Vlookup does get confusing sometimes. It's essentially saying like if you wanted to find a city that matches up with an invoice ID here on the left, what city would match up with, let's say, 750678428. So basically how you do that is you go here, I'm just going to write it right here, equals, as you always do when you start a formula, Vlookup, and then you start the formula. I spelled it wrong, Vlookup. And essentially it tells you what you need. You need your lookup value, table array, column index, and range lookup. So what are we trying to look up right now? Let's say we're going to look up this one right here, 252562699. I can click on this square and then comma. What's my table array? So what do I want to, what columns do I want to select from? And let's say I want to find the city, Yangon, that is unique to 252562699. I'd highlight these 3 columns, and that would be my table array. And as I told you guys earlier, you can also lock it in to make sure it doesn't. And then column index number. So out of these 3, invoice ID, branch, and city, what am I trying to find? I'm trying to find the city, which is Yangon. So I'm going to type in 3 because that's the 3rd column here on the left, comma, and then right here is true or false. Do I want an approximate match or an exact match? For this purpose, I'm going to use exact match. That's what you're probably going to use most of the time. And if I click that, false comes out. And when I close the formula, click enter. Let's see, Yangon should come out. And if you look right here, on 252, the corresponding city is Yangon. So that's right. And essentially, if I drag and drop, Yangon, Yangon, Mandalay, Yangon, Yangon, same thing right here. Yangon, Yangon, Mandalay, Yangon, Yangon. So that's essentially what VLOOKUP is. If you have a certain value and you're trying to find the corresponding city or customer type, you can do that and it'll produce it for you. Pretty simple. The next one I want to go over is the if and or if or. Pretty simple as well, similar to the if statement, but essentially if and is if it satisfies both of the criterias, and if or is if it satisfies either. So both and either is are different things. Either would be or and both would be and. So we can start off with the if and. So if it satisfies both these criterias, let's say if and criteria number 1 will be, let's say less than 3, or yeah, let's say if this number right here, or let's say less than 10, this number right here, let's see, if this number right here is, oh God, it's kind of lagging, less than 10, and then my second logical test criteria will be, and if it's a credit card. So I'll write if that, and, or we'll do this, if cost of goods sold is under 170. If that's less than 170, and if it satisfies both of these, I want it to write, for this purpose, I'll just say true. And if it's false, I'll just write false. And this is going to be true. Sorry, it's always good to also put parentheses or quotation marks on these to make sure they know it's a word. True. So because right here it's under 10, 8's under 10, and N20 is under 170, it's going to write true. However, if I drag and drop this, for example, this is going to be false. Why is it false? Because 21 is not under 10, and N22, 430, is not under 170. So it's going to write false. Essentially the same thing, if or, it's just if it satisfies either statement, you start off with the equal sign, if statement, and then or. It's going to come up as the same thing. What's your logical test number 1 and logical test number 2? So I'm going to say if, let's see, if it's a credit card, put in quotation marks, if it's that, or sorry, if or here, we'll stick with numbers actually to make it simpler. If this right here, N27, is greater than 400, or if this right here, let's say, is under 10, which it's not, is under 10, we want it to write true. And if it's not, it's going to write false. So as you can see here, it would only satisfy one of the criterias, and that one being N27 being over 400, because obviously this number right here, 21, is not less than 10. But if I click enter, it's going to come out as true because it satisfies one of the criterias. You don't have to satisfy both of them. But if I drag and drop, you can see that this one's going to be false. And why is it false? Because 11 right here is not less than 10, and 224 is not greater than 400. So it doesn't satisfy either of them. So essentially the difference between and or is and you need to satisfy both of the criterias, and or none of them. The last topics I want to talk about are count ifs, sum ifs, and average ifs. Basically what count ifs is you want it to, I'll show you. You want it to count the numbers, count the cells that meet the criteria. So essentially what it is, start with the equal, count ifs. You can see here there's count if and ifs. I was always taught to use the one with the S, because count ifs you can put more than one criteria, but you can also just put one, versus count if you can only put one criteria. So it's always better to just put count ifs. Count ifs, what's my criteria range? Or essentially where to look for. I want to look for, let's say M. I want to look in column M. You can lock both those in just to make sure when you drag and drop or anything, move it around, Excel doesn't change where you're looking. And then comma, what's my criteria? Let's say I want to look at e-wallets. Quotation marks, e-wallet. And then close it. So essentially I'm saying count it if it's e-wallet in column M. Click enter, and you can see there's 345 e-wallets in here. Same thing, you could change e-wallet to, let's say we could change it to cash. Just write cash instead, enter, there's 344 cash. If you want a credit card, 311 credit cards.
Is it case sensitive?
It is not case sensitive, so good question. If I change this to a lowercase and this to an uppercase, it would still produce that number. So as long as you type it out, it'll be fine, but I like putting it as it is so it's more accurate. It's not really more accurate, but just for me.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that you guys have for Adrian? You can
Yeah,
stop
sorry,
right
feel
now.
free to ask any questions. Stop me if you guys
You
had
can either put it in
questions.
the chat or you can unmute and say it.
You
Yeah, and also let me
combine-
know if I'm going too fast. What was that, Angela?
Can you combine and ors?
Can you combine them?
Yeah, like have both of them in the same statement. Like if it's a credit card and like above, I don't know, the cost of goods sold is like above 100, or like it's cash and above 400, like whatever. Like
Yeah, you could.
okay.
If you combine and or. You don't, or actually you wouldn't use that. You would probably just use or for that. Use or, yeah, I get what you're saying here. Let's say you write or, and then if this number is greater than 20, 21, my logical test, my next one, if this one's greater than 50, then and, yeah, I don't know if you could, usually I would just use, oh, so you're saying if it's either and for, or if it's both of them for, what was your question? If you could like,
Just like if you could do like if it's this and this, or this and this.
yeah, I wouldn't necessarily combine it a lot because or already like, you're saying
Like
if
if
it's
it has
and
to be like a credit card and above this amount, or it can be like cash and above this amount, which like hypothetically, like
Adrian, I think if like inside the or, like in for logical one and logical two, if you put
and,
it might work.
yeah, if you put and in here, type your
Okay.
formula, whatever, and then this would be your or statement, type it in here, yeah, and then value true, value false. You could do it that way. I personally never had to do that, but I guess if you were presented with that, you'd have to put the or statement within the and.
okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah. Count ifs, already did count ifs. Sum ifs, same thing. Sum it if it meets this criteria. So sum ifs, your first thing is what to sum. let's say I want to sum all the unit prices. I'd click that, or I'd click the column, sorry. Click the column, lock the column in, comma, criteria range. Where am I looking for the criterias? I'm going to be looking in customer type. Lock that in. So within which customer types do I want to add up their unit prices? I'm going to add up the ones for member. Click that, and as Zeus said, it's not case sensitive. Member, enter. So this is essentially the total with all the unit prices added up for the members. Vice versa, if you wanted normal, change that to normal. And that would give you the total for the normal ones within customer type, the unit prices for the customer types. Last one is average ifs, same thing. Average ifs, as I said, it always give you if and ifs. I like to use ifs. It's basically saying if it's this, average all the total or average all the numbers. So let's say if, where am I looking? We're gonna use cost of goods sold. That's gonna be the numbers we're gonna average, comma, what's my criteria range? Let's say payments. What kind of payments do I wanna average for cost of goods sold for? Let's say I wanna do cash. Cash, close parentheses, enter. So essentially, for all the cash within the payments, what's the average cost of goods sold? And it gives me 310. And for numbers, you can always make it simpler. Essentially, all you do is go to home, go up to under general right here, and click this. It just essentially reduces or adds decimal places depending on how you want your data. You can also always change it to number, currency, accounting, short date, long date, and anything you want. So let's say I wanted this number 310 as a percentage. I just click that and it adds a percentage behind all of it. But in this case, because it's a number, I want it as currency, let's say. And it puts it as 310.65. Move that back up. Yeah, that's about it. Did you guys have any questions on anything I went over? All good. All right. If not, I'm going to throw it back to Michaela and she's going to go over her favorite pivot tables. Thank you.
Okay, so let me reshare my screen. There we go. Is that working? Cool. Okay, so as you guys know, there's like a ton of things you can do in Excel. We could go over this forever, but we're just picking and choosing. One of the things that I think is really important for everyone to know is pivot tables, just because it's super easy and it's really helpful if you want to say, take some of the data that's in your original table and make a new table out of it or make a graph out of it. So let's go through. So if you want to make a pivot table, you're going to go to Insert. And then right on the left side, there's this little pivot table button and you can hit that. This is basically saying what data do you want to look at. It pre-selects all the data you have in here. And you can kind of see that it's all outlined out there. And then it's going to choose where to place the new pivot table. I recommend just doing it in a new worksheet, just because it's the easiest and cleanest. So if you hit OK, it'll open a new worksheet down here and the pivot table will go in there. So let's rename this. If you control click and hit rename, let's say we're going to make a pivot table that is comparing gender and product line. Okay, so now we're going to go up and it automatically opens up this little window on the right side, and that's where you're going to actually create the pivot table. So let's say we want to compare how much each gender is spending on each product line. So the two things that we're comparing is gender. So we're going to drag gender into columns. It's just drag and drop, which makes it super simple. And then as you can see, it's just populating it over here for you. So we already have female, male, and grand total over there. And then say we want to compare those two by product line. So then we can click product line and drag that down into rows. And then it's going to populate the row labels over here. So we have electronic accessories, fashion accessories, etc. So those just pre-populate for you. Now you can notice that the table is empty. There's nothing in there. And that's because we haven't specified the values that we actually want it to show. So let's say we want to compare the total revenue that each gender is spending on each product line. So if we drag total revenue down into values, you can see that it's automatically just putting those values into our table for us. And just a quick note, this down here automatically just says sum of total revenue. But if you click that little I button, that info button, you can actually change like what type of value it is. So say instead of doing the total in here that females spend on electronic accessories, if you hit say average and hit OK, that's going to change it to be the average in a transaction that the female customer spends on electronic accessories. So just a little side note that that is there, and you can change it to any one of these categories. So we'll go back to sum and hit OK. Now, if you're looking at this table, it's not very obvious, you know, what you're looking at. You can't really tell like what's the highest and lowest amount. So if you click on your table and do insert, there is an option for pivot chart over here. So let's click on pivot chart, and you can see it automatically just creates this bar chart for you. And it usually tries to choose, I think it might always be a bar chart, but it basically just puts everything in there so you don't have to specify what goes where. Let me move this over, close out of that for a second. Also, by the way, if that part on the side that you drag and drop ever closes and you want to reopen it, if you click on your table and then go to pivot table analyze, there's this thing that says field list. If you click on that, it'll come back up. So that's good to know. So back to the chart, as you can see, I'm not going to go over all the design things with the charts just because it's kind of self-explanatory. You guys can probably figure it out if you don't already know. But there is all these different design options. Quick layout, you can change the layout, add chart element. You can do any one of these things, add any of those things. Pretty self-explanatory. There is also this switch row and column. So I'll just click on it to show you guys. So you can see that now instead of showing two columns, male and female, for each one of the product lines, if you click on that, now it just shows all the female ones together and all the male ones together. So depending on how you want to view your data, you can switch row and columns, and that also switches your table row and columns as well. So there's that. And then if we go back to our, first of all, does anyone have any questions on that specific pivot table?
Hi, mine started with like a blank at the bottom. Like, is there some setting I need to turn off to get rid of it, or?
Where is it showing a blank?
At the end of rows, at the end of the rows and columns, it just has blank in parentheses and no data. So.
Interesting.
Oh,
did you drag the, let's see, let me open this up. Did you have the total revenue dragged into values?
yeah.
Where, sorry, explain again where it was saying blank.
Like right under sports and travel, and on the right of mail, it just has blank with no info. Like it doesn't really do anything, but like I'm just wondering if there's a setting to turn that off.
In this grand total
Like
box
right,
is up.
it's like above that. There's just like a blank column. It's just kind of like, I don't really know. I don't think it really does anything, but I was just wondering if there's a setting or something.
You know, I'm not 100% sure if there's a setting that turns that on and off.
Okay.
You might have accidentally selected additional columns that you put in earlier in the workshop from the first worksheet.
Okay, I will look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Because if you added Yeah, if you added anything with the functions, if that was added in, it might have messed up the table.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's what happened, but it usually just goes pretty automatically. If you still can't figure it out, you can send us an email and we can try and figure it out together.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there any other questions about this pivot table? No.
I'm sorry, I had a quick question. I saw that in like the fields thing, there was like a filter thing. What does filter do?
Let me pull it up. So filters is basically like if you, let's just try one. Let's see. To be honest, I've never used filters, so I'm not 100% sure. I believe what it does is like, if you want to look at maybe like a certain, like if you want to filter out some of your data and not look at all of the female electronic accessories, for example, data, and you want to only look at, say, ones that are in like a certain city or something, I think that's what it's doing. I've never used it, so I'm not 100% sure how to. But if we ever do another Excel worksheet, another Excel workshop, that's definitely something we can figure out and go over, unless someone else has input on that.
All right, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I wish I had more of an explanation for that. Okay, so let's close this and go back to.
It looks like you drag in the filter, it puts it at the top of your chart, and then you can like
okay, does it go up here then?
like on the drag in the filter to like the side like you were doing, it like brings it to the top of it, and then you can like choose which one. Like I put in like payment method, and there was like a drop down.
Okay.
You filter like that.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. So like for city, then if you want to do just the Mandalay data, okay, that's where it goes. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. Okay, so perfect. We figured that out. Teamwork. Okay, so if we go back to the original sheet, there's one more type of pivot table. I guess it's just, I'll go over this quickly, but if you do want to do a pivot table, you don't necessarily have to have rows and columns. You can just do rows and values. So if you do pivot table again, open that up. Let's say we want to, by day, look at the revenue. So if we drag date into rows, it automatically puts month in there, basically just so it separates it by January, February, and March. I'm going to take that out just to make it look more simple. So we have on the side, you can see all the dates in there. And then let's just drag total revenue into values. So now you can see there's just, all we have is the dates and the revenue for that day. We don't have any columns, and that's fine. You can leave it like that. So if we click on that and then want to insert a pivot chart again, it'll pull up a pivot chart that's basically showing data by day. And it automatically puts it in a bar chart, which is a little bit weird because usually if you're looking at time series data like this, you want it in a line chart or line graph. So if you go to design, you can go over to the right side and it says change chart type. So you can click on that and do line, and that will automatically make it into a line graph or line chart. So this is a little bit easier to understand than it would be in a bar graph. And then the real reason I pulled this up is to show you guys that you can actually do, say like linear regression or something within Excel. So if you click on your graph and go over to the left side and hit add chart element, there's an option at the very bottom that says trend line. So click on that. And let's just say we want to do linear regression on this. You can click on linear and it's automatically just going to add in the linear regression for this data. So if you double click on that line, it's going to bring up a section over here that has more options. So let me just make my screen a little bit bigger. Okay, so we have linear chosen, and then with linear regression, you can display the equation and you can display the R squared. So they have different options for what you want to display. They're right down here. You can drag them wherever you want. And then if you want to make this bigger, just select it and then go to your home tab. From there, you can make that a little bit bigger. Oops. Got deselected. But you can make that a little bit bigger. So it is kind of nice. Just obviously this data doesn't really lend itself to a linear regression very well. As you can see, the R square is tiny. If you guys don't know what that is, it's basically just like the percentage of variation in the data that's explained by your linear model. So it's really, really small, 0.16%. Obviously, this line isn't fitting the data very well, but if you do have data that lends itself better to a linear regression, this is a super easy way to just do it in Excel. You don't need some crazy statistical software to do this. So that's a really good tip if any of you are just trying to get some simple modeling done. Other than that, does anyone have any questions about this next section or about anything that we've gone over? No? All right, cool. So it looks like it's 11:55. I'm gonna stop sharing.